How are you? I'm glad you're here. I've just finished an enormous pile of bread for you. I have a new French bread recipe for you, and I can't wait to share it with you. If you've seen me do French bread before, disregard the previous recipe, please. This is so much better, and it is so easy. It's just incredible. This morning, I want to prepare a batch of French bread for you without any difficulty at all. The first thing you do is to measure out. Oh, please remember that you have to have a scale. When you bake bread, you must have a scale. You can't use a measuring cup because flour changes its volume all of the time, depending on the weather, humidity, whether or not the stuff's been packed down, whether or not it's been sifted. Nobody wants to stand around and sift flour anymore. You don't do that. So get a good scale. I have a little Swiss scale here. It's Swedish. Boy, am I in trouble. And I have it set for 2 pounds, 3 ounces. And I've measured out my flour here. Let me see if that's... See, I just use an old lunch sack. There we go. It's exactly 2 pounds. There it is. It's exactly 2 pounds, 3 ounces of flour. That's what I want you to use. All right? So first of all, we'll put into our mixing bowl. And if you don't have a fancy KitchenAid like I have, then you can use a regular Mixmaster to at least get it started. So we have 2 1/2 cups. Got that? Of tepid water. What does tepid mean? Tepid means when you put your finger in it, you go, ah. It isn't warm. It isn't cold. It's just, ah. Got it? To that then, 2 1/2 cups of water. We're going to add 2 packages of dry yeast. That's about 2 teaspoons if you're using it from the jar. I find it a little bit cheaper this way to buy it in a jar. There we go. Otherwise, use 2 packages. Got it? Nothing to it. And we'll begin to make a sponge. Now, the total amount of flour that you're going to use is 2 pounds, 3 ounces. Don't change that. Don't become confused now by the fact I tell you to use 4 cups and so forth. All of the flour that I use is going to come out of this sack. I've already measured it. By the way, if you want to buy good bread flour, try and find a brand that has that's heavy in hard wheat. In the West Coast, in my area in Seattle, I have a marvelous hard wheat flour from Fisher's Flouring Mill, but I can't find it out here. So look around for a hard bread flour, and that'll give you a very lovely crust. That's what we want. So to our water and yeast now, we're going to add 4 cups of the total amount of flour. Got that? Don't get confused. So here we go, and we're going to begin with a classic French dough. It's just so easy to make, and it's terrific. Just measure that out loosely here. Because what we want to do is to allow the flour and the water to blend for a while, and we want to allow the flour to turn to gluten. There's a substance in flour called gluten that is really tantamount to goo. And we want it to really goo up here so that we get a nice crust. If you make bread in too much of a hurry, you see you'll get that nice soggy, white, lovely, painless, tasteless stuff that you and I call white bread. I can't stand it. I don't eat it. Neither will my sons. There, we have 4 cups of the total amount of flour. Look at that. Look inside the bowl, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. You see? See how gooey that is? Now, if you wait long enough, this will pull away from the side of the bowl. And I know you doubt me, so I'm going to show you what happens. I'm going to get another bowl. I've already done this batch. You want to mix this in your Mixmaster for 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, it will turn to gluten. It'll be absolutely gooey, gooey, gooey. I don't mean just a sticky mess like this. You'll see the difference. And then it'll be ready to absorb the rest of the flour. Gluten is what we want. And it's very, very important to good bread baking. That's the secret. Let me show you the difference. I've already kneaded this one for 10 minutes. Now you watch. You see how sticky? Whoops, it's climbing right up the paddle. You see? Comes right up the paddle. See how sticky that is and how stringy? How it pulls out? You know, whoop, you see how it pulls away from the bowl? Gorgeous stuff. All right, we're ready now to add the rest of the flour. And we simply pour that in. And we need to add some salt too. Let's do the salt first. You want 1 teaspoon of salt and 1 teaspoon of water. And there's a teaspoon of water and 1 teaspoon of salt. All right, blend that. We're just trying to make a heavy, very heavy saline solution, you see, so it'll mix into the bread properly. In it goes. You have that now? 1 teaspoon of salt, mix in 1 teaspoon of water into the dough that we've blended for 10 minutes so that it pulls away. Now, if you don't have a heavy Mixmaster, at this point you have to stop and blend in the rest of the flour by hand. And by the rest of the flour, I mean the flour that's in the bag, right? I've got to change sacks. It's important that you understand I started the first batch out of this sack, and the batch that I have on the mixer now came from this sack. And we're probably, an ounce or 2 off in terms of weight because I used the cup, you see? So I want to use the bag that goes with this bowl. Am I making sense? Good. Now we'll blend in the rest of the flour. This will take some time, so I'll show you what we finally wind up with. I usually make an enormous mess when I make bread. That's the fun part. And yes, I do get my hands into this eventually. I love it. Let me show you what happens. Blend in the rest of the flour. Knead that for a time, about 5 minutes on the machine, about 15 minutes by hand. And you'll wind up with a dough that's simply gorgeous. Let me show you. Let it rise then for an hour or 2 hours, I guess, and then you can punch it down. Look what you get. I just throw mine on the counter. You see, I just set it on Formica. That's what this is. You see, just plastic counter. Come here, you. And then I put a bowl over the top. It's much easier to handle that way. You see, a good dough doesn't stick to your fingers unless someone's watching you on television. Then, of course, it sticks to the wall, boards, and everything. All right, here we go. Let's knead that down. Have you got the recipe? 2½ cups of water. I'm going to knead this for a bit now just so that we can become friends, you see. 2½ cups of water. 2 pounds, 3 ounces of flour, exactly 2 pounds, 3 ounces. And that will vary from 1 ounce, depending on the weather. If it's the summertime and the flour is a little bit wetter than it would be, or if it's heavy rain in the wintertime, you may want to vary that by 1 ounce. You'll get into it. I use generally about 2 pounds, 3 ounces. And then a teaspoon of water and a teaspoon of salt. And you blend the flour into the water solution by 4 cup units. Start with the 4 cups first into the water and yeast, 2 packages of yeast. Then let that go for about 10 minutes on your machine so that it's good and gooey. You make gluten, you see. When that's finished, then you put in the teaspoon of water mixed with a teaspoon of salt, and then eventually knead in the rest of your flour. Let it rise for 2 hours under a bowl on a board. Punch it down. Let it rise a second time. Punch it down the second time, and you're ready to mold your loaves. Now you're going to say, well, you're taking a lot of time to let this thing rise. Well, that's how you get a crust, you see. You can't hustle French bread. It's impossible. You've got to let the flour go its own trip. And that means that you've got to relax and allow the gluten to form so that you get a nice crunchy crust. So this is raised twice, you see. So now we're ready. Let me show you some shapes here. For instance, this one is very easy to do. You see? This is going to make 4 loaves, by the way. If I were to cut up this big blob of dough, I could get 4 loaves this size. And let me show you how to do that. It's very simple. I'm not going to let my good knife touch the marble, for heaven's sake, so you'll wreck the whole place. All right, we have 4 loaves out of that batch. And to make this particular kind of loaf, you see, this one with the cross on the top, which I think is really kind of pretty, simply fold your dough under. See, I'm making a nice round loaf. See what I'm doing? Folding it under my fingers, you see? Nothing to it. Isn't this marble a joy? Nice chunk of marble. Marble's cold, you see, and nothing will stick to it. So you don't have to keep adding a lot of flour. There it is. Now you put this on a pan, on a tray, and I like to put a little corn flour underneath the thing. So let me show you how that's done. This is hardly what you call complicated. And get the rolling pin out of here. That's marble too. I love it. All right. So I'm going to put cornmeal on the bottom, white cornmeal, on the bottom of my little loaf here. You see? Put white cornmeal on the bottom. Then we're going to put flour on the top. And that's a very simple process. You simply roll it in flour. The other method, of course, is to glaze the dough. But I don't like a glaze on this classic loaf. You see, this will swell up and we'll get this kind of shape eventually. And I like this what do you call it, dusty-looking peasant flavor that the appearance that the loaf has. Isn't that neat? Let the dough rise, and after the dough comes to a rise, an hour and a half, maybe an hour. It shouldn't take any longer than about an hour, you see. Let it rise on your pan, and then to simply make the crust, you just cut the dough. After it's risen, you see, you just cut the dough like so, and it will open up. Nothing to that one. It's very simple. You make a whole pile of these, 4 out of that batch, you see. Now let me show you another one. I'm going to probably just knead this dough back in here. I'm not going to keep making batches. I want you to see the whole works here. Let me show you another one that's really great fun. This one is hardly what you call complex. Now this is 2 loaves. You see, isn't it a beautiful loaf? See how easy this one is? Let me show you. It's a snap. You simply take a big blob of dough. There we go. And we knead it up here. Big blob of dough. Form it into a ball. And we're going to take half of the dough here. There we go. Form it into a ball, just as we did before. And poke a hole in the center with your thumb. You got it? You want a great big donut, you see? And then just start working on it and kind of let it hang. You see, I'm letting the weight of the dough kind of pull on itself. And just stretch this thing out until you get a great big round circle. Put that on the tray. Remember the cornmeal now. The cornmeal acts as a kind of ball bearing underneath the loaf. And on it goes, you see? Stretch that out. It has to be about twice that size. And then when it rises, you'll have a nice big round loaf. That's fun. Here's another one. It's very, very simple to do. Simply a little bitty roll, you see? Isn't that a gorgeous little thing? And it's so simple. All you do, let me show you this one. All you do is take a small amount of dough. You'll get a good, I suppose a dozen out of this batch. Roll it in a ball. Then roll it thusly. See what I'm doing? Just to put little ends on it. And there he is. And then later on, after it rises, then you can put a cut in him, you see? Roll them in flour, cornmeal on the bottom, and you're all set. Now let me show you the fancy stuff.